welcome to my channel. I'm JC Byrne, author of The Hybrid Helix and Partial Function, and now editor-in-chief of Grimdorf Magazine, a weekly free zine where I'm giving away a chapter of my own serialized story every week, along with some short stories submitted by friends of mine and people I know on Twitter. And it's free, and you can get it through my Patreon, and I hope people do, because it's kind of a cool project. So I talked more about that before, and I'll talk about it probably more in my end of the year wrap up video, which I hope to do in a few days. So today I'm doing things a little differently. My ring light broke, and I'm just going to hold my phone, and we'll see if this works. This is Book Berne-ing, a show where I talk about books, movies, and comics, and whatever else I feel like talking about, but I promise to never ever burn a book. And the topic for today is a phrase people use when they talk about books or movies, different kinds of properties. And the phrase is, it made me think. People say, oh yeah, that book made me think. And I was wondering, what do people mean by that? And at first I thought it was a very superficial thing, did the book evoke thoughts? Was there stuff going on in your head when you read it? And I don't think that's what people mean, because that happens every time you read a book, right? Every time you read a book, there's, you read words, the army charged down the hill, you're imagining an army charging down the hill. We call that reading comprehension. We don't say, oh, I really thought about the book when that happens. That's not enough. That's a very superficial thing. Nothing wrong with that. It has to happen, right? That's the most basically, you need to understand the words on the page, represent them in your mind. That's how you read. You need that. But that's not what we mean by thinking about the book. So what do we mean? But then there's a step where you can take that and then you think about it sort of after. I think it's usually after the fact. It can almost be during. You can almost have reading and thinking about the book at the same time, but they're not the same thing. And what that means is where you're doing this level of analysis. You're looking at the things that happen in the book. What did that mean? What was the theme being conveyed? Wait, why did that person, let's say this person does something, a character does something, and it's not explained. It's not saying he hit Jack because he was angry. What if it just says he hit Jack? Why did he hit Jack? Sometimes it's pretty clear. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of thought to figure out why I don't know who Jack is, whoever it was that you made, but it requires reflection. You have to think about it. You have to try to understand the character's motivations. If it's not explained, you have to have a thought process. You have to have this analysis that you do going, oh, he must have been, why was he angry? What exactly made him resort to violence in this scenario? And I'm going to give you a really simple example of this. And it's not even a book. It's from a movie, John Wick. So you watch John Wick. Spoilers. Spoil John Wick. John Wick's a retired assassin. He left the life. He's not killing people anymore. He's living a happy life with his wife. His wife dies. She leaves him a dog. He loves the dog. Bad guys come. They kill the dog. I don't even remember why they kill the dog, but they kill the dog. It's bad, and he gets glorious retribution for the death of his dog. That's the movie. It's a fantastic movie. Everyone should watch John Wick, unless you don't like violence. Then don't watch John Wick, because it's very violent. And you can watch the movie and it's very clear, right? There's no there's not a lot of complexity. You don't ever go, whoa, why is he killing that guy? It's because the guy either killed his dog or he needs to kill that guy to get to the guy who killed his dog. It's very straightforward. You're not going to spend a lot of time thinking about, oh, I wonder why this. But if you do think about the movie a little bit, you will realize there's some interesting things about the way it's structured. So, for example, I'm going to give you a very simple one. I watched the movie, loved it, and then I thought, what's interesting about this movie is that John Wick wasn't killing people anymore at the beginning of the movie in the timeline. He was retired. So by killing his dog, not only did they make him angry and invite retribution that way, but they basically turned him back into a killer. They recreated the sort of boogeyman, the monster that ended up killing them. By their own actions, the bad guys created the thing that was going to destroy them. They were the direct causes of their own demise. And that's sort of an interesting twist, the way the plot works. It'd be different if he was an active killer and they came and killed his dog, not knowing who he was, for example. But that's not what happens in the movie. And so when I realized that, it made me enjoy the movie just a little bit more. It gave me a little extra. Little. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying this is a brilliant analysis on my part at all. Very simple, but it required a little bit of reflection, a little bit of thinking about it beyond just sort of sitting there and passively consuming the film. I had to think about it a little bit. And That's what an example of what I'm talking about of when we reflect. We thought about the movie. When you think about, you're reflecting, you're analyzing it, you're considering it. And some people like to do this more. Some people do. Some people don't ever do this. They will never look for those deeper levels, of deeper understanding. And that's not very deep. But we know examples of people who get very deep levels of understanding. They talk about books. They'll talk about a book for hours, analyzing and comparing and giving evidence for and against certain hypotheses about what certain things really meant. Think about how people talk about a book with an unreliable narrator. Watch BookTube. Watch people discuss like Book of the New Sun on BookTube, what they got out of it, what the themes were, what it really meant. I'll get back to Book of the New Sun a little bit later. This is a thing people enjoy doing, and some people enjoy it more than others. If you want to see someone who relishes it, like watch like Dr. Philip Chase's channel on BookTube, right? You can really tell he relishes getting into a book, reading. He may relish the superficial reading of the book as well, but he really relishes that digging and the analysis, pulling out the themes, pulling out the deeper understanding and meanings out of the book, and considering them. And that's something that greatly adds to his experience of reading the book. And some people just don't, some people just read the superficial story and they put the book down and they pick up another book. And there's not really anything wrong with that. It's just different kinds of readers who are going to enjoy different kinds of books in different kinds of ways, right? So why am I bringing this up? This analysis, this ability to like dig in and find the deeper themes, we're not born with that, right? You have to learn it. Newer readers, whether they're young, when you first learn to read, you're just learning how to comprehend. Reading comprehension. Think about what your English teachers in school did. Your first grade English teacher wasn't teaching you to analyze, Jake hit spot, or spot bit Jake, or whatever your first reader said, right? You're just trying to get the words where I can read the words and I know what they mean. Like that's all you're looking for. But then at some point in school, your English teachers were like, well, let's actually dig in a little more. Let's read this. Let's read Lord of the Flies, and let's talk about what does the conch really mean. It's not just a conch. It's not just a horn. It represents like civilization, and it represents order for these boys stuck on this island. And when it breaks, it has that extra added meaning to it, and that's why they react the way they do. It's not stated anywhere in the book, in the text. If you just read the text, there's a story, but it doesn't say the conch meant something else, I don't think. You have to think about it. You have to analyze, and there are clues, but it's not explicit. So it requires this level of analysis. They try to teach you to do this in school, and some people relish it, and some people don't. Some people hate these books. They hate the books they had to read in school, and I think I can explain why in a way. So when you read a book, when you think about a book, you can think, what were its qualities at the superficial reading level? Was it fun? Was it funny? Was it had a lot of adventure? Did it have exciting sex scenes? Whatever the book had, whatever qualities it had, there are qualities it can have at a superficial level from just reading the text, understanding the thing that's on the page or on the screen in terms of a film. And then there's how much can you get out of it by thinking more and reflecting? How much extra nuance and depth can you get out of it from doing that? And a great example is if a book has like an unreliable narrator, right? If a book has a really unreliable narrator, the superficial story is one thing, as told by the narrator, you take them at face value, then you realize, this guy or girl, they're not necessarily telling me what's really happening. I don't know what really happening means if it's a fictional book, but you kind of get it, what's really happening in the world of the book. And then you have to think, and you have to reconstruct, what did they say? What does that really mean? What is really happening in the real world of this book? Why are they lying? What's their motivation to tell us stuff or to leave stuff out or tell us stuff that's not really true? And that gives you this whole added different level of engagement to the book that for some people is wonderful and rewarding and a great experience. And for some people, they will never get there. Okay. So that's why some books you can think about them, and I think if you spend a lot of time really thinking about John Wick and you really like analyze it and pour it over the nuances of the script and the dialogue, you're not going to get very far. I might be wrong, but I think you're going to get the superficial story, which is exciting and stuff. You'll get a little bit of analysis like what I just described. I think if you spent another 6 months thinking about John Wick, you wouldn't really get a whole lot more out of John Wick than you got from the first watch. Some, but not. You're gonna hit a dead end. Then there are other books where we know there's a lot of depth to them. You can probably read like Jenny Wirt's War of Light and Shadow and spend a lot of time thinking about it and keep uncovering new, nuanced, lovely details about the way it's structured that will give you added enjoyment for a long time. There's a long tail you could say, to your enjoyment of a book like that. Whereas you get this really like pulpy sort of fast-paced action. Cradle. I love, I always dump on Cradle. I love Cradle. Cradle's great fun. You spend a lot of time thinking about Cradle, you're not getting anywhere. Every character, their motivations are right there on the page. There is no debate, there's no nuance, there's no, oh, but really, what did Lyndon really want? Why do you think he acted that way? No, we know what he wanted. Like it's right there on the page. Like there's no complexity to it. And that doesn't mean Cradle's a bad book. I love those books, right? But if you spend hours and hours thinking about Cradle after you read them, you're not going to get very far. You're not going to uncover new understandings of the interactions between these guys. You're just not. It's not going to reward you those hours of thought. Jenny Wirtz probably will. Younger in the sense of people who have read less tend to do less of this reflection. I know there's going to be exceptions. There's going to be some 14-year-old who peers into the depths of literature and your kid, I'm sure, is a genius who does this. But generally speaking, people who are newer to reading do less of this in-depth analysis. They're reading more at the superficial level. And so books for them have to grab them. The superficial part has to be good in itself. It has to be funny or action-filled or interesting, or there have to be character arcs that are right there on the page, superficial, so that they get them. It has to be told. They have to be told. For most newer readers. So I think that's why YA tends to write like that. YA tends to have most of its value near the surface of superficial reading, maybe a little bit of thought, but not hours after hour of it. It's going to get you pretty much all the joy out of a YA book that you're going to get. And that's appropriate. That's what 16-year-olds need to be reading. And there's nothing wrong with an older person reading a book like that. That's why a lot of older people like YA books. That's also why some older people don't like YA books, because they tend to not have those rewarding lower levels where you really think about it, and then like 2 weeks later you're like, oh, now I get there's something else that Harry Potter really meant. No, Harry Potter didn't mean a whole lot beyond what's right there. You read it, you get it, and that's it. You can't spend 10 hours talking about the Philosopher's Stone or the Sorcerer's Stone or whatever they call it in your country and get more joy out of Harry Potter. It's right there. It's right there on the surface, and there's nothing wrong with that. Harry Potter is super popular. I'm not endorsing J.K. Rowling. You know what I'm saying. So some books reward like thought and analysis, and some books reward it less or not at all. So what does it mean when a book makes you think? And that's where I think what that means is, at the surface level, the book's not very enjoyable. The surface level reading is sort of boring or bland. The characters might be unsympathetic. Maybe it's not funny. There's no action. At the just the surface level, if you just read the straight facts, you're not getting that much joy out of the book. And I'm going to give you my example is Book of the New Sun. I haven't read it in a while, but my recollection is that surface level reading is kind of drab. It's an unsympathetic character, lots of travel, lots of like boring stuff. You don't really understand what's going on based on the actual explanations. You've got an unreliable narrator. So at the surface level, it's just like, nah, I don't know why I'm reading this. But then if you think about what you read and you realize, oh, unreliable narrator, so what's really happening? Like, well, why is like Severin, whatever his name is, why is he telling us this? Why is he a torturer? That's a weird job for a main character. What is the author trying to tell us about the world, about our preconceptions? What is he challenging? It's incredibly rewarding, right? People talk about it all the time. It's a beloved book. But what's rewarding is the experience you have thinking about it, not the direct experience of reading it. You can do both kind of at the same time, but the reading comprehension level, just the story as it's told, words on the page, some of the language is lovely. Okay, maybe some people just love that, but for the most part, the story's not enjoyable. It's thinking about it. It's piecing together what's really happening. It's understanding that, oh, this is the future, not a secondary world. It's putting together the clues, the themes, what he's saying about human nature, what he's saying about Severin's character and personality, by which lies he tells, and what he's clearly telling us is clearly not. When does he contradict himself, right? That all requires that secondary thought, that analysis. Book of the New Sun will make you think, because if you don't think, you're not going to have fun. Other books may have that depth, maybe not as much, but some depth. But they also may be fun on the surface. And a good example I'm going to come up with is Sadir Samir. A good friend of mine wrote The Crew. And I'm not saying The Crew is super deep, but Crew's very funny, action-packed book. It also addresses themes about like immigration and about like cultural assimilation and about racism, not in a heavy-handed way, but it's definitely there. And if you read reviews of The Crew, most of the reviewers don't talk about those thematic elements. Most just say it's a fun book with a lot of jokes, which is true. And I think what happens to Sadir, what happens to The Crew, is people don't think about it as much because they don't have to, because their superficial experience of reading it is already very pleasurable. You don't need to dig in to get value out of it because the value is on this. There's also value right there on the surface. Now, would it behoove you to do that extra thought and get a little more out of the book? I think it would. Just as much as reading the Book of the New Sun, it would behoove you to think about it more and get more value out of that book. Except the Book of the New Sun, you have to. Because if you don't, you're not going to enjoy it at all. Whereas with The Crew, and again, The Crew doesn't have as much depth as Book of the New Sun. I don't think even Sadir would argue with that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is it has some, it is worthy of reflection. You will get value out of reflecting on it. Same as with, and I think with a lot of work, great works of literature, they make you think because they're not that enjoyable on the surface. And that's part of the reason why a lot of people hate those books when you read them in high school, because you're being forced to read a book and the surface level appreciation is not there. So you're not enjoying it and you don't know how to reflect at the same time yet because you're a high school student, which may be why some of those books aren't the books you should be reading in high school, but that's a whole different story. And I'm not an English teacher, so maybe there's layers to that I'm not understanding because I taught high school chemistry, not English, for a lot of variety of reasons. Anyway, so here is the summary. One way of understanding what makes some books different. There's some books are more rewarding on the surface. Some books are more rewarding upon reflection, and some books are both. So we can imagine a graph, right? Like and then some authors are beloved or more or less by certain readers because of where they lie on this space, right? If you go to the right, go to the up, anyway. Like Brandon Sanderson, I think probably is on the scale of superficially enjoyable, but not worthy of a ton of reflection. The stuff of his that I've read strikes me very much that way, which is why some people think of him as a very YA-ish writer, even if he's not talking about his explicitly YA stuff, because he writes books that are very superficially accessible, and that's most of it. And it doesn't mean they're bad, right? But you don't have to really think about it to get it. You just have to read it and have some basic reading comprehension. I don't think they reward further thought the way other books do as much. At least, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's exceptions, but at least the stuff of his that I've read. And again, it doesn't make it bad. So I encourage you, if you like that kind of analysis, spend a little time thinking about the books that are also fun on the surface and see if there's more to them than that, because there might be. And that is what I have to say about the topic. So I hope you have a great, wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas. Hanukkah's over. My Hanukkah was very bland. That's okay. And I hope you have a wonderful New Year. This is JC and Byrne signing off.